Hello. Welcome, everybody, to the Recovering CEO podcast. My name is Derek Maribon, the Recovering CEO. Have a very special guest here today, friend of mine from way back in college. Well, we didn't totally know each other in college, but she ended up marrying one of my best friends. And she's had an amazing journey since then. We won't talk about how long that's been, but it's we both went to Michigan State University, and her name is Libby Sider-Nelson, and she is a life coach. She is a spiritual person. She is in recovery, and she's a mom of 3, and she's just an amazing person. So how are you today, Libby?
I'm good. I'm great, Derek. Thanks so much for having me on. I do have to do a quick correction, which is that I myself did not go to Michigan State. Did you know that?
No, I really thought you did.
I went to Northwestern.
Oh, embarrassing. You know what? I knew that. Oh my God, that's so embarrassing.
That's okay. That's all right. It's all good. I just, in case any of my Northwestern folks are listening, I don't want to, deny my true story. So it's all about rigorous honesty. So,
thank you. No, thank you.
From the get-go.
And
yeah.
We have talked about this because when Michigan State plays Northwestern, I remember now. I'm such a space cadet.
Okay. Yeah. That's all right. That's all right. It's easy. When one bleeds green, it's easy to assume that all the rest of the world does too. And
that's really true.
My husband went to Michigan State, as you know, so I'm surrounded by green. No worries. And it's a big basketball day for Michigan State.
It is. Yes. Awesome. So Libby, you're on the Recovering CEO podcast, and I started this because I wanted to raise awareness, especially in the workplace. And also, I think there's a lot of people out there who may come into recovery from different means. Maybe they don't realize they're an alcoholic. Maybe they don't realize they have an addiction. Maybe they're just kind of struggling in life. And I think that sometimes they might stumble upon a podcast like this and say, oh, this resonates with me, or this makes sense. And you were very interesting to me, not only because I know you, but because you're kind of a life coach, and you yourself have been sober now for a while. Can you tell us a little bit about your story and how you got there?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I've been sober since January of 2014. And my path, and I had become a coach about 2 years before that. So just a little bit about my story. I come from a long line of folks who have coped with alcohol, like so many of us have, those of us in recovery and not in recovery. And, for me personally, I wasn't a huge drinker during my high school days. I really was focused on school, and I was very involved in theater and performing and achievement. And really in college, as I mentioned, I went to a school where achievement was really important, and it was a really competitive place to be. It was really competitive in the theater program. It was really competitive academically. And I sort of went from being a big fish in a small pond in my high school to being a little fish in a much bigger pond. And I think that's when I look back, sort of when I started to use alcohol to just cope with some of those uncomfortable feelings, questions about who am I? Why am I here? What's special about me? How am I different? And it wasn't in a compulsive way, but I think, and I think we'll talk about this probably in the podcast, humans use all different kinds of things to mute the excruciating reality of being alive, and I mean, I think we turn to all different kinds of things, and your podcast, talks about that. We turn to alcohol, we turn to shopping, sugar, sex, drugs, fill in the blank. And so for me, I think that's just really the first time where I started trying to sort of mute down some of these deep feelings of discomfort and not enoughness that probably had been percolating for a long time. So fast forward, my story is not super interesting. I haven't had my recovery story is not super interesting. I progressively used alcohol more and more to cope. I had 3 babies in 2.5 years. I have twins in there, so I'm not quite superhuman, but it was a lot. I have a spouse who at the time traveled a lot and worked really long hours. And I had no tools for self-care. I had no tools for boundaries, saying no, taking time to sort of take care of myself in any meaningful way. And I think we get self-care wrong a lot in our culture. It's one of the things I talk about a lot in my work is we kind of think it's manicures and vacations. And while that is great, actually self-care really shows up for most of us on a day-to-day level in terms of boundaries, addressing some of our character default settings like perfectionism, people pleasing. And I think a lot of women, especially and women in business, are very culturally groomed, to feel that perfection is the route to success. So anyway, long, short, I just got to a place where I was using wine every night to recover from, and it was the only method I had for self-care. So, beset by need, work, personal, kids, life, aging parents, all day. And then I would get my kids to bed and I would open the wine and pass out on the couch, by the end of the night. I mean, it just got to where this was a daily compulsive behavior. And the fact is that I'm super fortunate that I didn't have a bottom that was shocking, that made any headlines. I have a lot of things that I got off the train. The train was hurtling to a really undesirable destination. I had seen it in other members of my family, and I was able to, fortunately, because of the way they paved the path for recovery before me, I was able to get off the train before I hit anything too terrible. The things that took the most hit were my own sense of self-worth, my own sense of integrity. And integrity, we talk a lot about values in coaching. Integrity is my number one value. And I just felt like, how could I show up each day teaching and sharing this work that I believe in so much, and then numb myself, into oblivion each night, get up the next morning, bogged down by regret, shame, guilt, and feeling like hell, and do the work I did and look myself and other people in the eye. So anyway, I've been talking a lot, but about 8.5 years ago, I just decided that I couldn't keep doing that and find any self-respect. And so I pursued recovery with the support of a lot of amazing people who had paved the way before me, a lot of amazing women, and still am very active in my recovery on a day-to-day basis today. And the rest is history, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
In a nutshell.
Yeah. Well, no, I love that. And thank you for your vulnerability and for sharing that. I think that's really important for people to hear. And I was so happy because we've known each other for a long time, right? And as I saw you, you got sober, and then you were like so positively posting about it and sharing your experience, and the love and support that you got from your network was amazing. And I think
it was amazing.
It was amazing. It was beautiful. And really, Libby, you've always been one of the prime examples. I always think of connection as the opposite of addiction. And you have a really good job of connecting with people. And I think you've built a really strong network, obviously the women you coach, and then your whole community, you do book clubs and whatnot. Can you speak about how connection is important in your life? And is that one of the values that you talk about at all in your coaching?
Yeah, absolutely. Connection is in my top three, top three values for sure. Right up there with integrity and growth, are kind of my top three, at least for now. Our values might change over time. But I think when we are in actively using whatever our numbing tool is, we are desperate for connection, to your point. And I love that work by Gabor Mate's work around connection and addiction. I think it's so vital because for me, I've always been a people person, and I've always had wonderful friendships and supportive family. I grew up in a really wonderful family and with a lot of connection. But when I was drinking so much, I hid that side of myself. Actually, Derek, a lot of my really close friends were surprised that I told them I was getting into recovery because my people pleasing and perfectionism kept me at home drinking wine on the couch, and so there was this whole part of me that I was carrying around and coping mechanism that I didn't share with anybody. And it really helped me along in my feelings of isolation and this sense that if people really knew me, would they still love me and would they still care about me if they knew that this is, how I was spending my time. And so anyway, I think now a really important part of my recovery is being in real, authentic relationships and sharing my story. And I really think, we talk in coaching a lot about stories and a lot about narrative. So all of us have stories that guide the way we move through the world, stories that come from our families of origin, our communities of faith, our schools, our cultures, our ethnic cultures. And, for me, I think when we craft the narrative that we want, that we believe, we bring other people along for the ride. So there's a cultural narrative that to struggle with addiction, to struggle with some of these undesirable behaviors is shameful. It's something that we should sort of cover up and say, what about these other things, and sort of skirt around. But I really think that when we're transparent, like you're doing through this podcast, when we're transparent about our stories, and that's not always easy to do right in the moment when we're struggling. I think oftentimes we have to be a bit on the other side to talk with authenticity about that. But I think the more we're able to do that and to say to people, hey, it's possible to be connected, loved, successful, build a beautiful life, and have this be part of the story when we're inclusive instead of exclusive about sort of some of those more ugly, parts of ourselves. Everybody, it's like I teach and facilitate Brené Brown's work. And she says, the two most powerful words when we're in struggle are me too. And to know that we are not alone in our struggles of being human, that kind of connection is so life-giving. And now I can't imagine my life without it. It's my people are everything. My people are everything. Second to my recovery, and spirituality. And then it's my people and the connections with them. I'm curious how connection has been a part of your path, Derek, and your recovery story.
No, I appreciate that, Libby. So I'm going to answer that. You brought up one thought just real quick about, the movie 8 Mile with Eminem, right?
Sure.
Yeah. And it's a wonderful movie, being from Detroit. I know you're from Philly. Philly's more Meek Mill, but Eminem from Detroit. But in 8 Mile, Eminem in the rap battle, he says everything about himself that would be a put down. So he fully becomes vulnerable and admits all of his character defects and all of his shortcomings. And he takes away the power from anyone else to ever say anything about him because he said it all himself, right? And I think that when we admit our vulnerabilities, then it gives us the feeling to be able to walk with, there's nothing to hide, right? And then nobody can hurt us.
Totally.
Yeah, nobody can hurt us. And but the connection thing is
getting out ahead of it.
Yeah, exactly. And my daughters still have not watched that movie, which is shocking to me. But they will one of these days. I have a big list of movies that Derek wants to watch that the kids won't watch. Godfather. But
you're not alone.
Yeah.
You're not alone.
Yeah. But the connection. It's so interesting. Like just recently, and so I've been sober, over 25 years, right? And I'm 49 years old, and I feel like I keep peeling layers of the onion and learning about myself, right? I mean, it's a lifelong journey. And as you know, in recovery, we keep working towards the perfect ideal, which is God, and I will never get there, so it's like a journey. And some people also talk about like a journey to my true self. That's another way to look at it. But it's a lifelong journey, so the connection thing, just recently, I realized that sometimes I would never want to play games. Okay, this is just one example. I would never want to play games. My family's big on games. At the holidays, they want to play Upward, Scrabble, Boggle, any game, and I would always say, no, I'm not going to play. You guys go ahead, go without me. Because I really wanted to kind of check out. I wanted to watch TV. I wanted to obsess on my phone. I wanted to be kind of off in La La Land and fantasy, or I just wanted to be alone. And I realized that was a slight form of addiction. And once I played games and once I realized it, I'm like, oh my God, when I am playing a game, I am 100% engaged with everyone around me. I'm not thinking about anything else. And this is like perfect example of connection for me. And that was just such a light bulb, Libby. And that just
Wow.
happened like 4 months
Wow.
ago, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. What a beautiful metaphor and for sort of life and how we are so tempting. It's so tempting to sort of step back and opt out, even when people are calling us forward. And my hat is off to you for saying yes to the family game nights because I personally do not find myself fully engaged in a game when I'm in it. I'm thinking, when is this game going to be over? So anyway, I think that's great. I love that. And it's just, you're such an example, Derek, of how the longer we stay in this work and we have the awareness and we're awake enough to notice what's happening in ourselves, how there's no limit to the growth we can experience. That's beautiful. Love it.
And, it's interesting to me because you being a coach, like you help people, right? So you take people who are here and then you move them forward. And I love that. And I feel like that's a calling, right? One of the reasons I started the Recovering CEO is because I felt like, my work is fine. I help companies. I do all these nice things to improve people's businesses. But how am I really helping people? And I wanted to help at a little bit of a larger scale. Can you talk a little bit about that calling of helping people and how you knew it was for you? And then some of the maybe explain a little bit how you move people forward to growth.
Sure. Well, I will say, I think in a lot of ways, I've just always had a heart for connection and being of service. I'm an Enneagram 2 for listeners that are familiar with the Enneagram, which is the helper, on the Enneagram. I'm in Myers-Briggs, like every test and personality style and quiz sort of cues me up, for this profession. So I come by it really honestly. And at the same time, I dabbled in other sorts of helping professions. I worked in social work earlier in my career. I started as an actor, growing up and then worked in social work for a number of years. And I stayed home for a few years when my kids were small. And then I hired a coach that a friend of mine had used to help me figure out what my next step career-wise would be. And I had applied to go back for a master's to become a therapist and really thought I wanted to go that route. And then worked with this coach for 6 months. And at that point, outside of becoming a parent, I would now add recovery to this list, but it was the most transformative period of time I had ever spent in my life. This 6-month period of working with him, again, outside of becoming a parent and later recovery, was an incredibly transformative and continues to be experience for me. But I fell in love with the work. And one of the things I love about coaching is our core belief in coaching is that people are naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. We don't come at looking at people from a place of brokenness, no matter what they're dealing with. And there are absolutely people who are struggling with things that are not appropriate for coaching. People who have unhealed traumas, who want to do a lot of work, looking at family of origin and past experiences, that sort of thing. Folks in active addiction are not great candidates for coaching. They can be, but there's an assumed functionality in coaching where people are able to take meaningful steps. And I don't actually move people forward per se. What I do is believe that person holds everything inside of themselves to move themselves forward. And I'm a midwife, not birthing the baby. So, it's listening deeply, it's asking powerful questions, it's helping the person to get where they say they want to go. Sometimes somewhere different than they said they wanted to go, hopefully better, and really unearthing some of those answers the person holds for themselves, and also getting curious about what are the ways they self-sabotage and hold themselves back. Of course, addictive behavior and numbing is a big one. And sometimes we'll be going along in coaching and it will be revealed sometimes quite a bit into the coaching process. Somebody will come to a session and we're working on, next steps for career or how they're going to cope following a divorce or some other. I work primarily with men and women who are in the middle of really bright, high achieving folks who are in the middle of major life transition. So that can look like all different kinds of things, from the quarter life crisis at 25 to moving into retirement, empty nest, career change, what have you. But I work with a lot of new and expectant parents, first-time parents. So anyway, long short, sometimes somebody will come and we're working on this other thing and they show up and they say, well, I wonder if the fact that I'm drinking a bottle of wine every night might be getting in the way. might be getting in the way of me making this meaningful life change. And then we have an opportunity to say like, yeah, well, it might. Let's talk more about that. Let's explore, what that's about, how long that's been going on. And sometimes we take a pause and people head off to therapy, or they, decide to get some treatment or address that. And so anyway, the coaching process is always about showing up with what is, being in the moment. Where are you? Where do you want to go? And just really, I think the most important quality for coaching is being curious. We always show up not knowing, and we work with what the client brings. And so curiosity is something that I have been obsessed with my whole life. To your point, I'm a reader. I know Derek's wife, for the listeners, and I have always shared a love of great books and are in an online book group together. And anyway, so that natural curiosity has served me, really well as a coach.
Mm-hmm. Gosh, it springs so many thoughts to mind. So many thoughts. What? One is I'm going to send you this book. I just interviewed the author of this book. You have not read this, have you? The Connected Leader?
Connected Leader. I haven't read that. No.
Yeah, I'm going to send you a copy.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
I think you'll like it. Like, she's an interesting business coach, and she blends like the spirituality of recovery with, geez, I had so many thoughts when you were talking, and then my mind just went blank.
Yeah. Well, I tend to go. So you have to stop me sometimes in the middle if you want to jump in.
Well, so there is a question I have. So
go ahead.
I know you spent a lot of your life as an actor. Have you taken any of your experience as an actor or knowledge in actor training and used that in any of your coaching? Like, does any of the things you learned there help with your coaching?
Yes. Yeah. Great. Awesome question. First of all, I think when we study acting, whether we're doing it at the, as kids or more advanced, I studied acting in college, what we're learning is to step into another person's mind, heart. We're really getting curious about, we're not acting as if, we are trying to become. So it's really taking, in some ways, empathy to the nth degree, because we're saying, what does it feel like to look through this person's eyes? And so I think people who are drawn to theater are naturally building that skill of being able to be with, another person and really have a deep amount of empathy, which I think is really key in coaching. The other thing that is interesting that you ask this, because the model of coaching I was trained in is coactive model. CTI is the school, and it's one of the oldest coach training schools. You'll meet, you can't swing a stick in the coaching world without hitting a CTI grad. But the CTI program was started in the 1990s by a couple of out-of-work actors in New York City. And it's really based on an improv model from the get-go. And so there's a lot of, in coaching, we don't come with a preconceived plan, like, here's what we're going to talk about today. We work with what shows up. So the client might have planned to say like, oh, I want to report back on how my job search is going. But actually, I just got into this conflict this morning with my partner, and I just am really stuck here. So can we talk through this? So we work through what shows up, and there's not any preconceived questions. We don't go through like a list of accountability. The client speaks, and just like improv, I ask questions, much like this podcast is. We didn't have and now we're going to hit on this point, and this point. We are in dialogue, and that's really the heart of improv and great acting, and also the heart of great coaching in my experience.
Okay.
And a great podcast.
Yeah, no, that's so cool. I love improv. Okay, I have to be honest here, because I've been thinking about going back for an MSW and this and that. And
yeah.
Actually, I missed the application deadline at Michigan State, and they just told me, nope, sorry, you got to wait for another year. And then I talked to you the day after I get that note from the director, because I'm like bad at deadlines. And I really think maybe coaching might be better, because even though I do feel like trauma plays a big role in addiction, and trauma plays a big role, I don't necessarily need to solve that. But what I am good at is kind of that improv back and forth. I think probably listening and getting people to talk about it. So maybe I should look into CTI or something. That's very interesting to me.
Yeah, well, off script, anytime you want to talk about that, I think there is a real, need for more men in coaching. And I think people who come from that recovery lens have something really unique and important to offer. And just a deep ability to be with whatever the client brings to the session, because we really never know what's going to show up. Again, we think we're career coaching and all of a sudden, we're talking about some really intense stuff, and so, yeah, I think you'd be great, Derek. I'd love to chat with you about it anytime.
I appreciate that. So the other thought that I remember now, so I've always thought there is sobriety, right? And there is not drinking. That's pretty easy. You don't pick up a drink. Mm-hmm. But then I think, is any of my behavior something that I would not want my mother, for example, to be watching me do, or my significant other, or my children, or my grandmother, or whatever, right. Would I be comfortable telling this to my boss, ever? And when you go through that list, and then that's really more about, like you said, living with integrity. And, and one of the things I want to help people with is to be able to stand on your own 2 feet, look someone in the eye, not feel that shame, right? Because I know that I am acting with integrity. And, but sometimes people aren't quite aware, even if they just, take a couple bucks from, from someone, or small things can impact integrity. And until I become aware that this behavior could be bothering me, I don't know. Do you ever get, as you peel the layer of the onion, do you ever kind of get to those things that, I know you mentioned drinking a bottle of wine a night, but I feel like there's so many examples.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think there's countless ways of being out of integrity with ourselves, most of all, and I think when you are in community with people in recovery, you hear people talk a lot about the little ways that even people with long-term sobriety, that sometimes some of these behaviors can creep in. And it's like, ooh, that's not really living with rigorous honesty. That's not really living in transparency and integrity. And so, yeah, I mean, I think for me, those are always a great sort of red flag that, it's time to plug back in, to get to work a little harder, to dig a little deeper, because I think there are a lot of ways you gave the example of shame and wanting to help people rise out of that shame and be able to look people in the eye. And I think, absolutely, that's the goal. And what are the ways, and we all have our different barometers, I guess, for what out of integrity feels like for us. For some people, it's something massive, embezzling money from their workplace, or having an affair outside of a committed relationship, or, whatever it might be. For other folks, it's more of a princess and the pea situation, that something feels off and we have to correct that in order to feel that serenity within ourselves. And I think for me personally, and a lot of folks in recovery, the further along we get in the road, the more like the princess and the pea we are, the more we feel like, okay, I guess I better go back and make that right with that person. I think I really need to revise that I did, or sometimes I'm just not going to do that again. I'm going to learn something from this experience of who I was or how I showed up. I mean, I had a thing a year or two ago where I was just having a day and in my worst place, and I'd waited for this cable person all day and rearranged my schedule. And I called and I just let this woman who was not the cable person, who was the scheduler, just totally have it. Like I was someone I barely even recognized, someone I hadn't seen for a long time. And I felt so badly after I got up. I kind of sat with it. I had a few minutes of meditation about it. And then I called back and said, hey, I just really need to apologize for how I behaved. This is a really frustrating situation. And no matter how frustrating it is, my behavior was not acceptable. And I want to take accountability for that. I'm really sorry that I did that to your day. And the person was so shocked. She was like, oh, it's okay. No one has ever called me back and said that, but for me, otherwise it would have sat like something in my teeth, all day. And so it was part of, and I think, I hope I'm not getting off in a tangent here, but I think the longer we're sort of in this reality of being in recovery, the more we kind of hit the reset button for ourselves. Not for the woman who expected a call back or deserved one, but so that I can move through the rest of my day and not then take this shame spiral and then bark at my kids and, yell at my spouse and eat a dozen cupcakes, or whatever my sort of way of coping with that discomfort is.
Yeah, no, it's very, very insightful, Libby. And really that's 10th step, right? So when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. Like as a person in recovery, they talk about the grouch and the brainstorm is a luxury we can't afford, which means I can't be that asshole all the time because
right.
I just can't live that way. So I have to like clean the slate daily, right?
Totally. Yep.
And that's all we can
100%.
really do is control ourselves, right? Or like clean our side of the street. I can't control anyone else. Yeah, I just listened to Open Talk today, and the guy was saying, a lot of people come to him when they can't stay sober because they think he can help them. And he says, you know what? He said, before I talk to you, I want you to get 2 weeks of continuous sobriety before I'll talk to you, because if I talk to you now, it's not going to stick. And he sends them off on their way. And he says it's amazing how many people actually get the 2 weeks because they really want to talk to him, which I thought was
interesting.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah, whatever it takes, right?
Yeah. I think setting boundaries is actually something I kind of struggle with. Like, is there any, I'm actually helping, I don't know if you remember my cousin who was dealing with addiction and mental illness. I came to Seattle
Yes.
and brought him back.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, he's still been struggling. He's still been struggling. And, he just got out of the hospital again. And, I took him to a meeting, but he's like drinking in between meetings, and struggling. Mm-hmm. And it makes me think, this isn't really good. And I don't even totally feel right driving him around or, giving him cigarettes and stuff. How do I set boundaries? Like, how do I set boundaries where, I say, maybe you don't get a week sober and then call me. You're going to make it. Just do that, because he thinks he can't not drink. So he drinks in between meetings and it seems hopeless, but how does a person set boundaries? Do you have any general tips on that?
Yeah, I do. Boundaries, and there are all kinds of ways of holding boundaries. And I think all of us have sort of our trigger areas where holding boundaries is a little more difficult, especially people of deep empathy. We don't want to feel like we're abandoning people. And yet, all boundaries really are is saying what's okay and what's not okay for us. And we are the self-reference point. And I think this can be really tricky for people in recovery because I think there's a message in a lot of 12-step work that service, service, service. And we sort of make a hero of people who surrender their entire lives to service. And I think that balance is important. I think part of good boundary setting is actually self-referencing. And maybe if you're not real reliable with yourself, maybe it's checking in with somebody who, whose wisdom you admire and saying, hey, I'm feeling like I want to set this boundary with this person because it's just killing me to see this person drunk all the time. Or I'm wondering if I'm enabling this person by helping them have as few consequences as possible, for their behavior. So sometimes it means, I think for me, checking in with somebody wiser than myself or who has an outside perspective, who can help me with that. And then I think we are a part of the equation. I think boundaries are about what's okay and what's not okay for us. And somebody who was less close to the person you're talking about might not have an issue setting a boundary, that because of a relationship, we feel like, maybe I really need to, or maybe I don't. I think part of it is taking a step back and just asking ourselves, how much control do we really have here? So for example, a dear mentor of mine in recovery likes to say, if someone tried to talk you into drinking, is there anything anyone could say to make you drink? And I said, no. Yeah. And she says, if you really wanted to drink and were desperate for it and had made up your mind to drink, is there anything anyone could say to you that would change your mind? And the answer is really no. Until the person has that, openness, willingness, and open mind, honesty, willingness, and open-mindedness, they are. So we have less control than we think we have. So I think then when it comes back, if I can't change another person, then what do I need to do to make this work for me and to be able to be a sustainable support for this person? because if setting a boundary means that I can continue the relationship in some capacity, that's probably far preferable than getting burnt out and saying, I'm done, I'm out. So I think that was sort of a complex answer, and it's unique to each situation. But I think our kids test our boundaries all the time, right? They ask us to do things that we're not really comfortable with. And sometimes we have to revise our boundaries. Sometimes we say yes, and then we circle back and say, you know what, I've thought about it some more. I know I said I would drive you to meetings, but I'm really feeling like until you string some time together, I'm going to need to take a step back from this situation. And we don't need to give people a lot of reason why or blame them or make it shame, but we can just set that boundary unapologetically. And honestly, at the end of the day, it's modeling good self-care. Boundaries empower other people to set boundaries. So
thank you.
That's my 2 cents for today.
Free coaching tip. No, I really like that. Let me share a concept with you, and then I want to hear your feedback on it, because this concept, again, kind of blew me away. And I know we've gone over 30 minutes, but this is very interesting to me.
Okay, great.
I was reading a book recently, and it was talking about trauma, and it said that, if you experience trauma at a young age, then you spend the rest of your life in pain management. And they mean a young age, like from the age of 2 or 4, if something bad happens to you, then you spend the rest of your life, even. Or under 2, yes.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? That kind of blew my mind, to think that babies spend their life in pain management,
Yeah. I mean, I would have to read more about that specific book, but it makes sense to me. I mean, I think that we are all about survival, human beings. That's how we're wired. We're wired to stay alive, kind of at all costs. And we will take no prisoners to do that. And so I think if we experience deep trauma and pain from a young age, then it is actually a coping and survival mechanism to give ourselves what we think we need to keep it on, And so that makes sense to me. I think that unhealed, unprocessed trauma, that's particularly true. I think that with really good support and deep therapeutic work and recovery work, if it's somebody who's struggling, with addiction, of course, not everybody who has trauma ends up in addiction, of course, but we're much more, we're definitely, there's a lot of us for sure, with traumatic backgrounds and big T traumas, as they say, wars and that sort of thing. And also little T traumas, small things that on the outside, might not look like much, but at our, whatever that young formative age, were really impactful for us. So I'd say, yes, that makes sense. And there is hope for, finding a different way to self-soothe, finding a different way to care for ourselves that is much more productive and less maladaptive than, just grabbing the closest thing, whether that's eating or using or getting caught up in other people's stuff or whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, Libby, I'm really enjoying talking to you, and you froze for a second there, but hopefully
I think we might be frozen,
okay.
Derek.
Yeah, hopefully you'll come.
Yeah, you did too. Are
okay.
you back?
Yeah, I'm back.
Yeah.
So yeah, sorry about that.
Can you hear me now?
I can.
Yeah, great. That's okay.
But yeah, no, it's very good. So I'm just trying to think of what else we could say to wrap this up.
Sure.
I know you said you have a bunch of clients, you're busy, right? So you're not really looking for clients. You're just, came on here to support me and have a conversation. Anything else you want to?
Coaches are always looking for clients.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you, similar to folks in recovery, the clients that I want to work with are clients who are ready to work. They are clients who say, for whatever reason, my life is not tolerable the way that it is anymore, whether that's the relationship, the job, the feeling inside myself, health, you name it. There's all kinds of ways that we can sort of get fed up with ourselves to a point where we think, okay, I got to try something different because what I've been trying hasn't been working for me. So, So absolutely, if those folks are out there and they're listening, I'd love to hear from you and see if we might be a match. And my coaching network is broad. And so oftentimes people will get in touch with me and they say, I really am interested in weight loss and doing something around this, can you help me? I don't coach around weight loss. I have my own sort of complicated history with food and as many folks, women in recovery especially do, but I have clients that I will refer folks out to other people or, people who have different specializations. We are a connective network, us coach folks. So absolutely would love to hear from folks. And really, I would just say, that in terms of, kind of, I don't know, parting thoughts that, if you're listening to a podcast like this, you're probably listening because either you identify with the story of recovery or maybe you're hungry for that or you're hungry for something different in your life. And you could trust yourself as far as that goes. You can pay attention to the still small voice that says, what if there's something better out there for me? And you have what you need to access the right supports to move yourself to a place where you can live your life with more joy, serenity, purpose, meaning. So Derek, thanks for having me on. I so appreciate you doing this work and putting it out into the world. And it's just been an honor and really fun to talk with you today.
Thanks, Libby. It's great to see you all the way across the country in Seattle. And it's been too long. So let's get a win tonight, and maybe we can do this again. In a few months or 6 months, once we get something more exciting, we can revisit. So thanks for your time, and thanks everyone for listening.
Sounds great.
Thanks for being on the Recovering CEO. See ya.
Thanks, Derek. Bye.